Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson, and welcome to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Now, before I actually get to talking about the actual comic that I'm looking at for this video, a couple things that I forgot to mention in the prologue. First off, you may have known, something I've neglected to mention regarding what I'm going to be looking at is that eventually I am going to be looking at the storylines that are currently coming out / have come out, and when they eventually, because once they eventually come out on trade, I do plan to get them, and so they will get put in the lineup. So, in case you thought I wasn't going to look at them because they weren't in that pile in the prologue video, well, I do plan to look at them. I also plan on making an exception to the whole has to be released in trade format for Marvel Voices Spider-Verse #1, just because I don't know if it's going to be collected in a trade or not. I do want to get it. If it is collected in a trade, then I'll look at it along with the trade, but that's how it gets. But I just wanted to clarify that right now. And on top of that, while I do plan to look at the tie-ins after I finish a main storyline, I am going to be looking at lead-in stuff. There are lead-in materials to whatever Spider-Verse story I'm looking at. Then I'll be looking at that first. So stuff like Edge of Spider-Verse or pretty much any Edge of series that you get. Plus, I'll be looking at that first. And if there are any lead-in stuff that leads right into the main storyline, then I'll be looking at that too. So yeah, I just wanted to give you that heads up because I realized I forgot to talk about that in the prologue when I actually did it. So yeah, that's a heads up. So anyway, enough about that. It's time we actually start talking about Spider-Verse prior. And something that you'll notice is that I like to group every section of Spider-Verse into what I call eras. Pretty much just a section of all the Spider-Verse storylines that involves something that pretty much has a common theme to it. And as such, whenever we go into those eras, I'll be listing them off. And to start off, the Spider-Verse retrospectives, of course, we'll be starting with what I call the Spider-Verse era, as this is the era that mostly revolves around the original Spider-Verse, as well as its follow-up storylines that are still mostly tied to that original story. And of course, to start off, we need to go from the beginning and look at Edge. And we'll have to look at the Edge of Spider-Verse miniseries, and we'll be looking at that through this trade. The Amazing Spider-Man, Edge of Spider-Verse, which contains issues 1 through 5 of Edge of Spider-Verse. And as I mentioned in the prologue, we'll be looking at everything issue by issue. So, before we actually start this, let's give a basic premise of the actual Spider-Verse storyline. Pretty much, as I mentioned, the basic premise was the idea that all the Spider-Men of the multiverse would be coming together for a common threat. And basically, that common threat was that a group of interdimensional vampires known as the Inheritors were jumping from reality to reality and hunting those worlds' respective Spideys. So, pretty much any Spidey they encounter, they would overpower, kill, and siphon the life force out of them like sponges, pretty much. And as such, a handful of Spider-Men in the multiverse noticed what they were doing and decided the best way that they could combat the Inheritors was by essentially grouping together. As while one Spidey couldn't take them on, if they could get as many Spideys as they could to go against them, they believed that they could stand a chance, and thus that's where Spider-Verse began. I'm not going to go into a lot more details about the Inheritors because there is some prior knowledge about them that you do kind of need for the story, but I think I'm going to wait until it eventually becomes important to the story or when those elements show up that I'll talk about it. But I will state this, the Inheritors have kind of shown up in Spider-Man comics before. Again, I'll get to that when I get to that, but for now, that's kind of the information that you need to kind of understand this, because it is what's important to kind of understand that, to kind of get into the story. But for now, we're just focusing on the Edge of Spider-Verse lead-in. And the premise for the Edge of Spider-Verse comics was that there was essentially an anthology series, and every issue of the original Edge of Spider-Verse book was essentially a story of one of the various Spideys that were taking part in the event, and that pretty much just showcased what their regular shtick was before they got pulled into all of this. So, pretty much what we got here are 5 stories about 5 very different Spider-Men. And quite frankly, I thought it was very interesting. So when I got this book, I was actually pretty intrigued, especially since the first issue, which we shall be looking at for this video, actually does focus on a Spidey that actually has been around before. And if you've seen the Into the Spider-Verse movie, then you are probably familiar with him too. As for issue 1 of Edge of Spider-Verse, we'll be talking about Spider-Man Noir. Now, again, If you've seen Into the Spider-Verse, you probably know who it is, who this guy is, but because I'm a massive comic nerd that likes talking about this shit, let's talk about Spider-Man Noir for a bit. Now, so pretty much, Spider-Man Noir is a version of Peter Parker who pretty much he grew up in a world in a Marvel universe that was set in the 1930s, and the basic premise for the Marvel Noir series was that it took a handful of various Marvel heroes and essentially just threw them into a 1930s noir setting, pretty much just changing up some of their origins, how they got their powers, and so on, and just ultimately making it very much moody and noir. And from that, we got stuff like Iron Man Noir, X-Men Noir, Daredevil Noir, Punisher Noir, Luke Cage Noir, and of course, Spider-Man Noir. And in the world of Spider-Man Noir, well, Peter Parker, like his main universe counterpart, was raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, but in this reality, they were socialist activists, and they actively decried the government and did instill within their nephew a strong sense of social justice. So much so that because of their various outcries, Peter's Uncle Ben was killed by the mob, who was apparently hired by someone high in government. And as a result, Peter kind of started becoming a bit more of an angry young lad. So much so that he wound up getting the attention of a reporter by the name of Ben Urich, who took him under his wing and got him a job working at the Daily Bugle. However, what Peter did not know was that Ben Urich was, I want to say, an informant who went by the alias of the Spider. And pretty much what Ben did was that he pretty much just dug into the seedy underbelly of New York's crime world and pretty much just dug up dirt, and the crime lords and ladies pretty much paid him to not leak that dirt to the public, with one of his biggest informants, or one of his biggest employers, so to speak, being this world's version of Norman Osborn, who was a crime boss who went by the name the Goblin. However, one particular night, Peter wound up accidentally intercepting a tip that was meant for Urich, that some of the Goblin's men would be transporting illegal stolen goods through a warehouse, and so Peter, who was still kind of getting his legs as a reporter, decided to go check it out himself without telling anybody, waiting in the rafters while the Goblin's men moved a lot of the artifacts. And one of those artifacts was actually a statue dedicated to a spider god, and while it was being moved, the Goblin's men wound up dropping it and it broke open, revealing hundreds of spiders that came pouring out and wound up swarming over one of his men, this world's version of Fancy Dan, and, well, they killed him. However, one of these spiders managed to make it up to the rafters where Peter was, and, as you do, it bit him. However, rather than killing him like it did with Fancy Dan, Peter instead wound up seeing a vision of the aforementioned spider god, who told him that he'd had nothing to fear, as the bite only brings death to those with evil intent, and that for Peter, the spider god would instead give him an even greater torment, i.e., or what it called, the curse of power, i.e., the spider powers. And as such, when Peter awoke from this vision, he was hanging upside down from a web and found that he had gained, well, the traditional spider powers: proportionate strength, speed, and agility, the ability to cling to walls, a sixth sense that warned him of danger, and, well, the ability to shoot webs from his wrist. As such, Peter, who already contained a strong sense of social justice, decided to use these powers to become the vigilante known as the Spider-Man, who would wind up using them to take down the various crime lords of the underworld, and end up clashing with such great names like the Goblin, the Crime Master, and this world's version of Otto Octavius, aka Doc Ock. Though he's not called that in universe, but he definitely is Doc Ock. So, yeah, that's basically the basic premise of Spider-Man Noir. And pretty much, there is more to the story, but I don't want to get too into detail about it. I do recommend looking up the original stories. They are pretty decent, but the thing is, when I saw that the first story was going to focus on Spider-Man Noir, I was pretty intrigued, especially since Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions did kind of introduce me to the noir version of the character, and it was kind of cool seeing him revisited, especially in a one-shot that was actually written by the writers of the two Spider-Man Noir miniseries. So I was kind of intrigued and wanted to see where this went. But was the initial comic good? Was it something that I would recommend? Well, let's talk about it. And pretty much, for this story, it actually takes place years after the events of the last Spider-Man Noir miniseries. And for this story, we end up meeting the noir version of Mysterio, who in this reality, like many others, is a magician whose main gimmick is illusionist magic, essentially misdirection and getting people to believe one thing when in reality is doing another. And how he does this is through a gas that once someone breathes it in, it essentially makes them susceptible to post-hypnotics. To pretty much it pretty much makes them susceptible to suggestion. So if you breathe it in and I told you, oh, by the way, I'm over there, you would think I was over there, even though I'm still sitting right here. And as such, how Mysterio typically uses this gas is that every night during one of his shows, he puffs it out during. He gives his audience a good whiff of the stuff, and pretty much, while it does add to the whole flair of his shows, in reality, he's just using it as a literal smokescreen, as they end up seeing on the stage what he tells them to see, and from their perspective, he's performing great mystical feats of magic, when in reality, it's just their brains playing tricks on them. Something that that this world's Peter, MJ, and Aunt May see as they end up going to one of his shows and think that he didn't wind up dipping himself into a large fishbowl, which only to come out completely unscathed. Though Peter does notice that something is definitely off, as when he apparently got out of the fishbowl, he was dry. But because Mary Jane had a good time, he doesn't want to spoil the fun, and just kind of keeps his lips shut. However, the thing is, Mysterio, well, he has delusions of grandeur. He wants bigger and better things, and he is tired of pretty much entertaining the lackadaisy yokels of this town, and he wants to make a name for himself in the criminal underworld. And to do that, he wants Spider-Man, because the thing is, he's seen Spider-Man at work. He's seen him kicking ass, taking names, fighting bad guys, and so forth, and he has deduced that somehow Spider-Man has gotten the blood of Anansi, the Spider God, flowing through his veins. And so Mysterio believes that if he can get a sample of Spider-Man's blood, then he can use it himself to also get on top, make himself stronger, and so on. And so, but the thing, unfortunately though, that's easier said than done, because after all, he's still a stage magician, and Spider-Man's just not going to come up, Spider-Man's not just going to come up to him and say, oh, here, take some of my blood. No. He needs to find a way, he needs to get creative to do that, and how he does that is by working alongside the noir version of Wilson Fisk, who, regardless of the reality, is still the Kingpin. And the thing is, well, working with the Kingpin does have some advantages, as the Kingpin is able to get him access to resources that he normally wouldn't be able to do, i.e., one of the Goblin's last remaining men, the Ox, who, yeah, Mysterio ends up interrogating him wanting information. And Ox does end up telling him about the whole spider statue debacle, how the spiders killed Fancy Dan, and so on. And pretty much this does confirm to Mysterio that Spider-Man is connected to it, as he appeared the day after the statue broke. But after he questions Ox about this, he wants to know a little bit more information. Specifically, he asks him about Felicia Hardy, and this is once again where I do need to go back to talking about the original comics, because it's sort of important to understand what happens next. You see, in the Noir universe, while Felicia Hardy isn't some extremely talented cat burglar who goes by the name Black Cat, in this reality, she's the owner of a nightclub called the Black Cat Speakeasy, or the Black Cat Club. I forget which one. I do need to reread that book. And she was, for a time, an ally of Spider-Man, providing him with tips and clues towards certain criminal goings-on, as a lot of them like to hang out in her club, and, well, essentially being a friend with benefits. However, during the events of the comics Eyes Without a Face, well, one of those criminals, one of the big bads for that comic, learned that she was working with Spider-Man, and when he tried to interrogate her to get information, well, she gave him nothing, and so as recompense, he wound up cutting up her face with a piece of glass, and while you didn't actually see the scars, apparently they were very brutal and did require her to be hospitalized, and while she did survive and did end up helping Spider-Man one last time, after that event, she essentially distanced herself from the world, constantly keeping herself locked up in her bedroom above the club, and to hide the scars on her face, she wound up wearing a white mask that resembled a feline. And unfortunately, after this, she really did not want to have anything to do with Spider-Man, and so, well, he kept his distance. As such, that's where we kind of see her, as we see Mysterio and Wilson charging into her room and pretty much demanding answers. And while Felicia thinks that they're just there to steal her shit, they start asking her more about Spider-Man, saying, "We know you heard you're the Spider-Man's lover. Tell us where he is." But she doesn't. But she says nothing. And when she just pretty much tells them to piss off, well, they don't listen. And when her bodyguard, a man named Lippy, tries to tell them to further back off, Kingpin shoots him in the face. Or, well, he doesn't shoot him in the face. He just kills him. He just shoots him and kills him. And as such, Felicia realizes, okay, they really do mean business. And they even ask her, okay, what are you hiding under that mask? Take it off. And she takes it off. And again, we don't see the scars, but based on the reactions of Mysterio and Kingpin, it's clear that it's not a pretty picture. As such, they quickly realize that, well, interrogating her is useless. Clearly, the worst has been done to her, and there's nothing Wilson Fisk could do that could break her at this point. So she's not gonna say one word, especially when they do ask her about the scars. She does state that they came from the last person who thought that she could lead him to the Spider-Man. However, Mysterio doesn't really mind, because even if she isn't going to tell them where Spider-Man is, she can act as good bait. Which is where we go back to Peter. And the thing is, Peter throughout the story has mentioned that his spider sense has kind of been going off, as he's been feeling a low headache that's kind of been building over the course of several weeks. He doesn't know what the cause of it is, but it is something that nags at him, and supposedly he does seem to get an answer to it, as one night while MJ and Aunt May are just sitting around, MJ is reading the newspaper, and one of the articles in there is an advertisement for Mysterio's show, in which he challenges the Spider-Man to save the cat-faced lady, or the lady in the cat mask, or else she will be sacrificed for Anansi. Of course, MJ and Aunt May think this is just a show, with even Aunt May thinking, why would he root so low as to try to employ the vigilante known as Spider-Man? But Peter does recognize the lady in the picture as Felicia Hardy, and so he does briefly excuse himself and does try calling Felicia Hardy's club, with the guy running the place saying that she just kind of left one day and didn't say where she was going. As such, Peter does start to realize that Felicia has gone missing, and considering that she seems to be in the ad, it looks like she might be in danger. And so Peter does believe that this might be what his spider sense was warning him of, and while he does not believe that Mysterio would willingly kill someone in front of a live audience like that, well, he doesn't want to take any chances. And so, on the day of the performance, he does arrive in his full Spider-Man getup, which, if you've seen the Spider-Man Noir movie, you know what it looks like. It's like a trench coat, like a mask with goggles instead of the typical teardrop eyes. It's pretty nice. It definitely fits a more noir style of Spider-Man. But pretty much he arrives on the show and tells Mysterio to let Felicia go. Of course, Mysterio, still playing it up as a show, does start putting on the theatrics, and ends up having his assistant drop a gas bomb that ends up getting Spider-Man. And because of the gas effect, he managed to trick Spider-Man into thinking he's right in front. Mysterio managed to trick Spider-Man into thinking he's right in front of him, but when Spider-Man goes for a punch, he ends up just hitting air, and in the distraction, Mysterio ends up sneaking up behind him and clonking him upside the head with a pin. As such, when Spider-Man awakens from this clocking out, he's chained up inside a glass coffin, having his blood drawn by Mysterio's assistant. And after it's drawn, so that it may be sacrificed to the spider god Anansi, Mysterio issues a challenge to Spider-Man for him to escape from the glass coffin, just like Mysterio did, as they begin filling it up with water. And pretty much this is part of the plan, as pretty much in exchange for Wilson Fisk working for him, Mysterio did promise that he could take care of the Spider-Man. And so, basically the plan here is to get him on stage, kill him in the act, and then just blame it on faulty equipment. As the glass cage fills with water, Mysterio ends up covering it with a curtain, and, well, while the water inside is reawakening Spider-Man's senses, he's still too weak to break through the chain, and he's running out of time. As such, in a last-ditch effort, he's able to create essentially a web mask over his mouth to trap enough air, and so when the glass coffin fills up with water, well, he's safe and sound, and the water manages to revive him. I'll let you decide if using a web as an air mask is actually possible. But it does seem to do the job well, as it gives Spidey enough time to regain his strength before breaking out of the glass coffin and breaking through his chains. As such, Mysterio tries one last attempt to take him out by pulling out a knife and trying to stab him, but Spider-Man is able to take him down with one punch before he takes the knife and gets Felicia free. As such, he ends up announcing to the audience that they'll all get a refund because the human sacrifice didn't actually die. Wilson Fisk and his man end up walking out because Spider-Man is alive, so that seems to be the end of it, right? Well, not really. Because as Spidey is freeing Felicia, his spider sense gets triggered again, only it's hitting him even harder than usual. And at this point, it's at this point he realized that the threat that he was sensing all those weeks was not Mysterio, it was something else. And whatever it is, it's here. And sure enough, as he has this revelation, a strange red light starts appearing on the stage that seems to form into the figure of a person. And it's here where we meet the first of the inheritors, or at the very least, the first that we'll be meeting in this story, Karn. A man dressed in a blue trench / overcoat with white gloves, basically a cummerbund or something underneath, and who is constantly wearing a diving helmet, with his weapon of choice being a two-pronged spear with laser tips, which actually does look pretty awesome. As such, once he appears, Spidey quickly realized that if this guy was able to trigger his spider sense so greatly, then this guy must be a major threat. Well, considering how bad the spider sense hit him, he's already a bit disoriented. As such, in an attempt to try and get Karn to back off, he ends up pulling a revolver on him, because he does keep a revolver, though he doesn't use it very often, and tells him to back off. Though Karn really isn't impressed by the revolver, and even says that after he kills him, he'll probably just keep it as a memento of him. But the pair are quickly interrupted as a new player enters the fray. Another Spider-Man. Specifically, the Superior Spider-Man. I'll talk more about him later when we get to a different issue, but put simply, he's here to save Spider-Man Noir's hiney, and while Karn quickly realizes what he's here for and tries to go in for the kill, Superior Spider-Man is able to activate a teleporter and get himself and Spider-Man Noir out of there, with Karn vowing that he'll hunt them down and kill them and slaughter them or whatever before teleporting away, and the audience in the theater just sit silently before they all start clapping because they all think this is part of the show. However, in the midst of everything, Mysterio begins yelling out, "Where's the Spider-Man's blood?" as apparently the syringe they used to take Spidey's blood is gone, and we soon see Felicia as she's running out of the theater, and she's got the syringe in her hand, so, guess Mysterio's plan is still foiled. But in the meantime, the last page of the comic actually does showcase where Spider-Man Noir and the Superior Spider-Man wound up. And it turns out that the Superior Spider-Man brought Noir to the year 2099. And the reason he brought him here is because, he realized Karn was hunting them across the multiverse, and in his own words, he called a meeting. As in the final panel of the comic, we see that Spider-Man Noir is not the first Spidey that Superior brought around, as among the group we see 4 other Spideys, including Ashley Barton, the Spider-Girl of the Old Man Logan universe, a 6-armed Spider-Man, the Assassin Spider-Man, again, get to him later, and Spider-Monkey from the Marvel Apes universe. So, yeah, that's where the comic ends, so. Okay, if you can't tell, I was very much nervous throughout the whole plot summary, but now that it's over, what are my thoughts on the first issue of Edge of Spider? Pretty much, I guess I can kind of talk about my thoughts on Edge of Spider-Verse #1. For starters, like I said, as someone who got introduced to Spider-Man Noir through the Shattered Dimensions video game, this is kind of cool to see him actually get more attention in this comic, especially since Shattered Dimensions did draw my attention to the original Spider-Man Noir comics and did get me to go out and read them. And the fact that Edge of Spider-Verse #1 was actually written by the original writing team of Spider-Man Noir, I think is pretty nice, as it does make it feel like it is a genuine continuation of those books. And it really does feel like it, because it really does have that same flair. Peter Parker Because the thing is, in the Spider-Man Noir miniseries, I think they did a good job at showcasing the duality of this world's Peter Parker. Because he was a bit more harder than the Peter Parker we know from the main universe, but he was still identifiable as Peter Parker. He was still kind of an outcast, a bit socially awkward, and a bit of a brain. But unlike the Peter Parker who had a much nicer lifestyle, had a much nicer upbringing, and was genuinely a jovial guy, this one does feel a little harder, definitely a little rougher around the edges in some areas, and I think it definitely showcased it well. At the end of the day, he was still a good kid, because his Aunt May and Uncle Ben did still imbue within him their strong morals and a sense of responsibility. And even in this comic, you do see him showcasing those talents. You do see him showcasing that in how he acts with people. When he and Mary Jane and Aunt May go to see Mysterio's show, he figures out right away that there's a trick that none of them are seeing. That Mysterio did something to make them think he went in the water, but clearly did not go in it. But because Mary Jane had a good time, he decided to just not say anything because, well, he just wanted to be happy. And according to some text boxes that display his inner monologue, apparently Mary Jane's kind of going through some crap as apparently in between Spider-Man Noir as that a face and this comic, she wound up going overseas. To join the. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. She joined the. Come on, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Shows how unprofessional I am. Good lord. She joined the Abraham Lincoln International Brigade fighting for the Republic, and apparently she's still kind of shell-shocked. So, it's clear... So has him seeing her actually happy and enjoying herself... Excuse me a second. Sorry about that, had to deal with doggy-related shenanigans. But yeah, like I said, Peter just wants to see Mary Jane happy because she's... Not because she just thinks that she needs some cheering up. And honestly, it is pretty sweet, but you can tell that his Spider-Man is a little different from the regular ones. Like, he can still have a mouth on him and still be kind of quippy. Like, when he does confront Mysterio, he does have a sense of confidence about him, making him pretty much just kind of laugh off some of Mysterio's things, but he is a much more serious Spider-Man. Excuse me one second again. Again, doggy-related shenanigans. As I was saying, yeah, he is a bit more of you can still see he's Spider-Man, but by the same token, he is a bit more, he's a bit more rough around the edges. Still identifiable as Spider-Man, especially in how he acts and how it works and operates, but definitely a little bit more serious. Not too serious, but still serious enough, especially since he does kind of have a temper about him. But with that being said, it is still cool to see his universe revisited, and it is interesting to see in the noir version of Mysterio, and in what ways he does mirror the Mysterio that we know of the main universe, as both are still showmen who are interested in grandeur and getting to the top of the food chain, and both are ultimately, and especially in how they're both operate as illusionists. Because again, Mysterio calls Spider-Man out by kidnapping someone that he cares about and pretty much challenging him to go and save her during one of his shows. It's pretty nice, and it is pretty interesting to see them both clash and to see Spider-Man have to outthink him. I will admit it does feel like it's kind of a stretch that Spider-Man was able to overcome his trap by using a bit of his web to essentially create an air pocket in his mouth, as I don't know how much air you would actually have if you did that, and regardless of how good his webbing is, I wonder just how effective it would be inside a glass coffin that was filled with water. So, I'll say suspension of disbelief in that regard, but it still feels kind of dumb that he could get away with that. But another thing I like is that it does still continue expanding on stuff in the Spider-Man Noir story, while also kind of leaving hints for potential future storylines should this universe get revisited again. Case in point, we see more of Felicia Hardy as she's kind of used as a tool to once more get close to Spider-Man, and when she is ultimately freed, she does further sabotage things by stealing the vial of Spidey's blood that Mysterio and his assistant took. And I think that does get answered back on later in a later storyline, which we will be talking about. But For now, it does just kind of lay down the plot threads for what's going to happen later on. So it is pretty. It is laying down a plot thread for a potential future storyline anyway. So I do like that, and it does feel like things still are continuing in the noir universe, even though we haven't been checking in with it for a while. So I'll give kudos on that, and I do like how they kind of work it in, especially when the plot to get Spider-Man, as Mysterio does, as seeing how Mysterio has to work through it, does kind of showcase more of the behind the scenes, and does showcase him as really not a supervillain, but kind of a tactician. Definitely someone who is working in the criminal underworld and is trying to find a way to outthink someone that is smarter than him, both in the case of the Kingpin and in Spider-Man, as part of Mysterio's grand plan to want to become the overlord of the underworld, so to speak. It does mean that he does want to one day overthrow the Kingpin, but for now he needs to be on his good side until he gets what he wants. So he does kind of need to play ball with him in this regard. But it does showcase that he is smart, but it also does showcase that he does still have his ego on him, as well. He does clearly still like the attention, as even early in the comic, he and his assistant are walking out of a newsreel that's talking about Spider-Man, and he overhears this kid and his dad looking at potential shows they could go to, and the kid at first is thinking, like, oh, look, Mysterio the Magnificent, should we go to it, Dad? And the dad's all like, I don't have the money to spend on some two-bit conjurer, and then the kid says, well, why don't we go to the Amazing Zooland? I heard they have 1,000 monkeys, and the dad's like, oh, I'm sure that sounds great, and Mysterio's response is, I was passed over for a monkey? So, yeah, he still clearly has an ego. He's smart, and he does try to play things safe, but it's clear he still has a high opinion of himself, and he wants you to think he's great too. So, I do like that, and I do still like seeing in what ways he does mirror the Mysterio we know. And on top of that, I do kind of like how this does build towards the eventual tie-in to Spider-Verse. As throughout the most of the story, it really has nothing to do with Spider-Verse. It really does just feel like a actual adventure set in the noir universe. Spider-Man dealing with a threat, Spider-Man dealing with a new villain that he has to overcome, people that he knows and cares about being caught in the crossfire that he has to save, and by the end, it all comes down to him outthinking the villain and saving the day. But throughout it, he talks about how his spider sense is throbbing, how it just keeps getting worse and worse. And when it gets to Mysterio, he at first assumes that that's what the spider sense was warning him about. But even after he takes down Mysterio and saves Felicia, it just hits him like a truck. And that's when we actually get the tie into Spider-Verse, when Karn comes in and Superior Spider-Man has to come in and save Noir's ass. Which, if I can give another knock towards Edge of Spider-Verse #1, it's that outside of their universe, some characters aren't written exactly how you would think they would be. Case in point, when Karn shows up, I'm not gonna give too much away about him, but the way he talks when he confronts Spider-Man Noir and about how he thinks that he's a pathetic little creature that's hardly worth the killing, it does kind of feel or when he gets angry when the kill was taken from him, it does feel a little iffy for him to act that way. And then likewise when the Superior Spider-Man shows up, well, I'll give you this. His dialogue does feel like how Spider-Man would act in this situation, just not this specific incarnation of Spider-Man. I'll get into why when I actually start talking about him later on, as there is going to be a time when that's appropriate. But for now, yeah, it does feel a little weird. It feels like that they the dialogue itself for both Karn and Superior isn't bad. It just feels out of character for both of them. With that being said, though, issue 1 of Edge of Spider-Verse, I think, is still a good issue. Not great, but still pretty decent. It feels like it continues the storyline from the actual Spider-Man Noir comics. It does feel like it's still set. It does still feel like it's a part of the whole it does still feel like it's part of the ongoing storyline in that universe. It brings in some nice new it does bring in the noir versions of Mysterio and Kingpin, which I guess Kingpin first appeared as he appeared in Daredevil Noir, but whatever. So that's still pretty nice, and seeing Spider-Man outthinking Mysterio and taking him down was still pretty nice, and how it did lead into Spider-Verse, I think does it does create enough hype that makes you want to know what's going to happen next, especially when out of nowhere you see this guy in a diving mask show up, try to kill Spidey, only for another version to pop in, save his ass, and reveal that he's not the only Spider-Man that he saved when you see the group of the other Spideys around. So it does a good job at essentially building enough hype to want you to try and check in and see what's going to happen next, just to see. So I'll give you that. I think that actually is a good thing. And on top of that, we got some good artwork. As the artwork for the story, to kind of give a little example here, I suppose. The artwork is actually pretty decent, as it does feel kind of real, as it feels like a painting in some regard, which is very different from the original Spider-Man Noir comics, though I honestly think that's a kind of an improvement. But it is still a pretty nice, but it is still really good artwork. It does feel like it's something out of a painting. Very realistic, but it is still very dynamic, very moody, can be colorful, and definitely can convey the action well. So overall, Edge of Spider-Verse #1, I think, is a good first issue and a good first outing. So that, again, does a good job at telling a good Spider-Man Noir story, does a great job of building up to the eventual threat, some cool interpretations of characters, some nice storyline building. Overall, just a pretty decent first issue. Nice way. So, yeah, that's about it. I thank you for watching. I apologize if I felt like I was nervous throughout this whole video, because kind of was. This is still new territory, so I would appreciate if anyone can let me know if they think I'm doing a good job, or if they think maybe I should just, or if they think I could improve in some areas. And before anyone says, "Well, get a script and be structured," well then, I'm sorry. This is just kind of how I vlog, and I know it sucks, but it's just what I do, and I did vote on this, so I'm sorry if this type of vlogging is off-putting to you, but bottom line, I do hope that you like it and as such, now that we're done with issue 1, I hope you will tune in Thursday as we take a look at the second issue in Edge of Spider-Verse, and we see the introduction of probably one of the breakout stars of Spider-Verse, Spider-Gwen. So, till then, I hope you have a good night. I'm Samuel Johnson, and hopefully on Thursday I'm a lot less nervous than I am now. So, till then, hope you have a good night, and take care.